The gas crunch that Europe is experiencing of late is not showing any signs of letting up in the near future. On the contrary, geopolitical frictions are signaling an even more rugged path lies ahead. From accusations by European parliamentarians that Putin is holding off extra gas supplies to Europe in order to pressure regulators to approve Nord Stream 2 pipeline, to a diplomatic bust-up between Algeria and Morocco that threatens to stop one gas pipeline that traverses Morocco, feeding into Spain and Portugal. Finally, to an Azeri-Iranian border simmering with military tension, jeopardizing a number of oil and gas pipelines that run into Europe. All this has got EU politicians scrambling to devise a joint strategic gas reserve plan, whereas ordinary Europeans are hoping for, indeed, a very warm winter later this year. With me to discuss these latest developments and how it affects European energy security is Professor Jonathan Stern, Distinguished Research Fellow at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. Professor, welcome on the show. Thank you for taking the time. The global gas crunch, is it a normal symptom of a boom-bust cyclical industry, or is it a side effect of a disorderly energy transition?
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. I would say both of those issues are very relevant, but also the boom-bust cycle has been exacerbated by the pandemic, which first led to a recession and is now leading to a recovery and has exacerbated both the depth of and then the height of the recovery. So we have a whole lot of things coming together in a kind of perfect storm. And of course, the cold winter of last year did not help, which means that our storage was lower than we thought it was going to be. So we have all kinds of things coming together, which has created this really extraordinary situation.
Professor, in all of this, do you think there is a Russian role in the European gas crunch in order to bolster the case for Nord Stream 2?
The Russian position is very complicated, and Nord Stream 2 is only part of the complication. Just going back a few years, I spent 5 years as the EU speaker of the EU-Russia Gas Advisory Council. And the Russians told us again and again not to move to the kind of market that we currently have, which is dependent on spot deliveries and spot prices. The Russians are convinced that the way to trade gas is on long-term contracts with oil-linked prices. And we told them, no, we want to move to a spot market based on spot prices. And now, of course, they're saying, listen, we told you to sign long-term contracts at prices that we thought were more predictable, but you didn't want to do that. Now, of course, if you take a look at the prices over the last 10 years in Europe, until the beginning of this year, you'll see that for most of the 10 years, spot prices were well below oil-linked prices. And in fact, last year, 2020, for most of that year, prices on the spot market were between 4 and 6 times less than oil-linked prices. Today, they're 2 to 4 times more than oil-linked prices. So would Nord Stream really help this? Well, I don't think so. And the reason is that what Nord Stream 2 would do, if it was operating, would be to bring gas which is currently traveling through other corridors, particularly in Belarus and Poland and Ukraine. It would bring that gas via the new pipeline. The Russians, for the last 3 or 4 months, do not have additional gas to sell to Europe because they experienced the same winter that we had in Europe at the end of 2019, 2020, 2021. They experienced that, and their storages were almost empty. So they have been refilling their storages and will complete that at the end of this month. Remembering, of course, that winters in Russia are much harsher than winters in most other parts of the world. So it's very convenient to blame Russia for everything that's happening. But in fact, Russia didn't create this type of market organization. We in Europe created it. And we have enjoyed relatively low gas prices for a very long time. And now, unfortunately, we're suffering relatively high gas prices.
Professor, onto another headache for Europe. If Algerian gas via the GME pipeline stops at the end of this month, what would the energy repercussions be for Europe? And what are the options as well for Algeria, Morocco, and the EU, in particular Spain and Portugal, be?
So the Algerians have said that if a new GME agreement is not made by the end of the month, they can supply the same amount of gas to Spain and Portugal via the Medgas line. I think I'm not clear how they do that calculation. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it's not clear how they would do that and still supply pipeline gas to other parts of Europe because they have limited gas. But I think the bigger point here is not to renew this contract is a lose-lose situation for the Algerians, the Moroccans, and everyone in Europe. I mean, everyone has. This is a classic case where a political disagreement could cause everybody to lose, whereas continuing the current agreement would cause everybody to win. And therefore, you would hope that a solution would be found.
Therefore, Professor, in light of all of this, has natural gas solidified itself as a bridge fuel, or have the latest developments highlighted the need to speed up the transition, leapfrogging gas?
So there are at least 2 or 3 different perspectives to this. Firstly, if these prices continue, which incidentally I don't expect, or at least not for more than the next few months, gas will become too expensive and uncompetitive in large parts of Europe, and other fuels, perhaps not lower carbon fuels, will take their place. And that will be bad in a number of different ways. But what I would say is that the transition is well underway in Europe, and particularly in Northwest Europe, plus Spain and Italy. These are the governments which have committed very strongly to ambitious targets. And that includes moving away from all fossil fuels, including natural gas. What this crisis may do, particularly if it continues for a long time, is to persuade ordinary citizens who are currently using gas and companies that are using gas for industrial purposes that moving away from gas should be accelerated. And therefore, this is a dangerous development for the natural gas industry in Europe and potentially problematic for those countries which are currently supplying gas through pipelines and LNG.
The EU is studying draft plans to jointly purchase and store a strategic reserve of gas. Is this necessary in your opinion, and is this doable in the near future?
First of all, I think it's unrealistic because it would require massive changes in competition rules and also a very significant increase in investment in gas storage. And we need to understand what the purpose of gas storage is. The purpose of gas storage is really to compensate for unusually cold weather or the breakdown of a particular facility like an import terminal or a pipeline or a domestic field. Nobody has enough gas storage to last for several months just in order to counteract high prices. So I don't think it's realistic. But the other thing that I think we need to understand is if Europe is moving away from fossil fuels, including gas, in order to meet carbon reduction targets, there's no point in making major investments in new storages, which would need to run for about 20 years if they were to pay back their investments.
Finally, Professor, your thoughts on the upcoming COP26 in Glasgow and how all this could or should impact the discussions on the energy transition.
So I'm hoping that Glasgow will see a full number of countries attending. I'm not sure whether that will be the case. I happen to live in the UK, in London, so it's not so difficult for me to get to Glasgow. But I think it will be quite difficult for a lot of countries because of restrictions in their countries and restrictions in the UK to come to Glasgow. But obviously, we're hoping to have a lot of countries and major governments attending. We're hoping to have a big success. But I think we need to be a little bit cautious. I mean, the problem with the pandemic now is that countries have very different priorities in their heads. And this energy crisis means that many governments are thinking about how their citizens and their companies can afford to do certain things in terms of reducing emissions. Now, I completely agree with everyone who says, well, whatever we do now, we will save money because the consequences of inaction will be so incredibly expensive in the next several decades. And I just hope that governments remember that. But the difficulties that we've had in getting commitments to fulfill the $100 billion a year to poorer countries make me a little bit nervous about how successful we're going to be. But I hope I'm wrong.
I have to say, I hope as well that you're wrong on this one. But given the delay in the $100 billion to the developing nations that we've seen in the last couple of years isn't a good sign. Thank you very much, Professor Jonathan Stern, on taking the time and coming on the show. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.